So we're recording. I'm gonna share my screen. All right. Hopefully you're in the right place. If you intended to attend the When Home Becomes the Workplace series, you're at the right Zoom meeting. Today we are going to be talking about coping with isolation and loneliness. If we have not met, I'm Kelly Holder. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm also the director of the Office for Professional Mental Health. We're going to spend some time talking about isolation and loneliness today. It's interesting, last week when I was saying, I'm getting ready to present on this, I realized I have been struggling with my own isolation and loneliness. And so I don't know if I'm the greatest person to talk about it, but I'm going to bring some examples and share maybe a little bit of my experience and what I've heard over the last couple of weeks. So as always, here are our objectives. We're going to define isolation and loneliness, and we're going to outline the challenges of loneliness, and then discuss ways to cope with isolation and ways to prevent loneliness. Okay. My reminder as we begin this time together is that you are not working from home. You are surviving during a pandemic, and this time has gone on much longer than many of us have hoped, and it's going to continue in some ways for a while. And so it's important that we look at these things in that light, all right? In that light, we want to look at this. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to pause because I don't know what you did right before this presentation. I don't know if you came from another meeting. I don't know if you got to take a break and go outside for a walk. I don't know if you're doing paperwork or helping a stressed out student or staff member, or even dealing with your own stress for work. But I think it's important that we give a moment of pause, and I figured, why not take one right now? So I'd like everyone to just take a moment, and let's just take one deep breath. And I want you to hold in your breath for just about 2 or 3 seconds, and then release it slowly. Let's do it one more time, and this time, maybe close your eyes and get a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed. And this time, take a deep breath in. Hold it for 2 or 3 seconds, and then relax. And then let's just relax our neck. Let out some of that tension by stretching your neck, maybe rolling your head gently. Maybe taking your shoulders and pushing them up towards your ears, and then letting them fall naturally. And do that one more time. Lift up your shoulders, hold them kind of tight, and then let them go. These pauses are needed, and they're maybe needed much more frequently than we were having them before. So hopefully that was a nice pause for you. I found this quote as I was gathering data for this talk. It says, as the coronavirus forces us to socially distance, life seems shallower, more like survival than living. And I don't know if any of you are having that experience of being physically and maybe in some ways socially distant from others, but it does impact our lives. If you go online and you just Google loneliness or isolation during coronavirus, you can find a ton of stuff. There's articles in the New Yorker and the Time magazine. Psychology Today has talked about it. We know that coronavirus and loneliness is an issue. But loneliness as an issue just didn't start because of the coronavirus, right? As Americans in the US, we've had our own problems with loneliness, and there's been problems with it across the globe. Here is some data that the Times put out in their article, and you can see that there has been an increase in the number of households that just have one person in it, from 1969, where it was only 17% of the population, up until 2019 to 28% of the population. And then in 2019, based on generation, income, living status, and gender, here are the Americans who reported being lonely in 2019. And you can see that our younger generations are having more difficulty with loneliness. It's just seeming to increase, right? Also by income, we find that people who have a lower income report having increases in loneliness, right? And then people who live alone seem to be more lonely, and people who live with more than two other people seem to be more lonely. So sometimes we think about people who live with large families, multiple kids in the home, and think, well, maybe they're not so lonely, but this data shows otherwise, right? And by gender, it looks like males tend to be more lonely than females. And then when we look at that on top of the pandemic, you can see where they show always, sometimes, or never lonely because of the pandemic. We can see that there is a large part of the population who feels more lonely because of the pandemic, right? Loneliness is something that we really don't talk a whole lot about, but it's been around and it has been exacerbated or escalated because of the coronavirus and what we have to do. In this same Time article, I found this quote, and I put it in here because it resonates with me in some ways. It says, even in a house full of screaming children who I love more than anything, I find that I feel especially vulnerable. And this is Gladdow. Earlier in the article, they say that she is a 41-year-old woman who has 3 children in her home, right? And it says she feels an unspoken pressure to be the glue of the family, and I'm trying not to let them down, but in the process, I am crumbling. And the article just goes on to talk about her own sense of loneliness in the midst of this pandemic and in the role that she plays caring for her family and caring for others. And they have examples of this throughout this article. It's a good article to look at. It's titled COVID-19 is Making America's Loneliness Problem Worse. And it was put out by the Times. Here's the link. So, what is the problem with isolation, right? There are some that say all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room. I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly true or not, but there are some difficulties with loneliness. We know that loneliness is a risk factor for mental disorders. We know that loneliness increases depression rates and suicide rates, especially in the elderly or the older population. It's a prime indicator for social well-being. It's an independent risk factor for sensory loss, connective tissue and autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular disorders, and obesity. So loneliness does impact our health. We know it contributes to fatigue and decreased poor performance in healthcare workers. And so we know that that could be an exacerbation or increased problem, especially during this pandemic. Boredom and loneliness can lead to anger, which is a public health problem with lots of people being lonely and maybe being bored, not having enough to do during this time. And also loneliness looks different based on socioeconomic class, right? And when we're forced to be alone because of safety measures and the COVID virus, it could create deprivation of basic human rights and dignity for some individuals. And so while for some of us, we think about loneliness as only our personal factors, it can be an issue of social justice when it comes to having forced loneliness or forced isolation because we're trying to flatten a curve or keep people from being sick. People then become isolated from their families, their cultural groups, and not be able to have as much meaning in their lives. So, what is the difference between loneliness and solitude? We've just talked about all the ways in which loneliness makes our lives worse. So one would say loneliness is bad, right? So loneliness really does have to do with our ideas or the meaning that we make around time being alone. Usually it's the thing that most of us dread. No one wants to feel disconnected from others. Whereas solitude is something else. Solitude is the time that you seek to be alone. And there are lots of benefits for solitude, right? Solitude allows us to reboot our brain and unwind. it helps us improve our concentration, right? And then we can increase our productivity. I know. So I have 3 wonderful children, but if I want to concentrate and get any work done, I have to get up early before before they're awake to get work done. I would say stay up late, but I'm not a late night person. I fall asleep really easily. So early morning and that quiet helps improve my concentration. I can think my own thoughts without people interrupting me, and I find myself to be more productive. Solitude gives you an opportunity to discover yourself and find your own voice. I am a great advocate of journaling, and I usually seek out solitude for my journaling time. I have done journaling sitting around with my family while they're doing other things, but it's hard to find my own voice when there's so much other things going on. I do want solitude for that. It provides us time to think deeply, right? It helps you work through problems effectively, again, because you're alone and you can have time to think. And solitude can enhance your relationships with others. As you have a better meaning and connection with yourself, it does enable us to have better connections with other people. So, with this said, we talked about loneliness versus solitude. In getting ready for this presentation, I said, well, what are we going to do during this time, and what are people doing during this time? So I surveyed my friends and my family. I made a survey and I sent them out just by email to people who are close to me, who don't mind filling out surveys. And I got about 87 people responded. And I'm going to share with you what they told me. All right, here are the results of the people that I know. So it's a convenient survey, right? It's not random control, but these are the people who are in some way connected to me or connected to friends of mine, right? A large portion of them have not been feeling extremely lonely. I asked the question, rate your experience with loneliness or isolation, 1 being not feeling lonely at all, and 5 being feeling lonely all of the time. And most people fell in the middle, but closer to not feeling lonely. Then I asked, are you isolating alone? And most people aren't. Most people are not by themselves. They have other people with them. Then I asked how much time people are spending on social media, and the vast majority spend about 1 to 3 hours a day. And then I asked, what is the one thing that helps during this time? And I'll show you more of those results here. If I could rank order the one thing that helps these group of people that I reached out to, the number 1 answer was calling friends and family. The second was physical distance meetups, followed by social media and small group video calls, then large group video calls, living with family or being near family. And that was actually a write-in. So enough people wrote in that that was the 5th next answer, and then texting fell below that. Then on this side, I have listed all the other things people said really helped: writing letters, reading, living with other people, watching television, having children nearby, which I thought would be a little bit different than living or being with family, just kind of investing in children and spending time with kids, having a routine work. Those seem to be, if someone had to pick the one thing that's helped during this time, those are the things, all right? Then I went on to ask the question, how does it make you feel after you do these things? After being on social media, which you'll see here's the first box here on, if you're looking at it on your left, how do you feel after you've been on a video call, right? How do you feel after you physical distance meetup with someone, getting together with someone? How do you feel after you get a text or having a phone call or writing a letter? And then the scale was 1 to 5, 1 being, more lonely versus 5 feeling very connected to others. And you can see from these results that most people felt well connected with people, much more connected with others during this time if they had a physical distance meetup. And then that was followed by video calls, phone calls, and then by text. All right, and so I just have that here. So most people felt connected to others after physical distance meetup with family and friends. People felt connected positively if they had a phone call or video call. People felt neutral to positive after texting with a friend or family member, but most people felt neutral or worse after being on social media, which I found very interesting. The next question I asked was about meaning, practices that create meaning. And I asked people just to check as many things that help them decrease their loneliness that were activities around meaning. And the largest thing that came back was music, right? Listening to music helped people feel less lonely. Then followed by prayer or reading the Bible. And if I had grouped together reading the Bible, reading spiritual books, and reading other writings, texts, or scriptures considered to be sacred, I think it probably would have surpassed, maybe it might have been higher had I lumped those things together, but you can see that they're all separated. Gratitude practice was very helpful for people. Having religious and or spiritual like gatherings was helpful. Journaling was helpful. Breathing exercise was helpful. Meditation was helpful. And then I asked the inverse question, what of these meaning practices did any of them increase loneliness? And 75% of the people answered that none of these creating meaning kinds of activities created loneliness. I did have a few write-ins. Some of them were reflecting, gaining weight, but all of those were just one responses, but I just thought I'd share those with you. So given the information that we know about loneliness in our own situations that we're having, and then the data that I gathered just from my friends and family, these 87 people, what recommendations would I make? The recommendations I would make is, number one, you want to stay connected with your friends and family. Phone and video calls seem not just to do well for people, but when those calls end, people tend to feel more connected with others. So you want to do things that make you feel great in the moment, but also make you feel connected long term. The second thing is that I would say schedule some physical distance meetups. You know, do you know your neighbors? Go out in your driveway at the same time and talk to your neighbors. I've heard of people who live in apartment buildings and coming out on their porches at the same time and everybody being on their different porch. Planning to go on a walk. I've talked with people who said, well, my daughter or son came over and they brought a meal and they sat outside on the porch and we sat a distance from each other. People who are doing like these drive-by parties where they're going by and showing signs and showing support. This act of seeing other people seems to make real meaning, and it was rated highest as what is helping people feel connected with others. The next recommendation that I would make is do the things that create meaning for your life on a daily basis. I listed things that work for the people I surveyed, but maybe something else works for you. Whatever works for you, do it, and do it daily on a regular basis. And it's interesting that music came out to be the highest thing, because music is one simple thing that all of us can appreciate. We all have our own songs. I promise you, every morning, almost for the last 3 weeks, I've been listening to the same song when I take a shower. I play it in the morning and it starts me off it just starts me off on a good day. And the song is, it's called Smile. It's by Jonathan McReynolds. And it just talks about maybe life doesn't always give you a reason to smile, but you can find reasons to smile. And the song is really about gratitude. And it just gets me started on my day. Number 4, tap into the benefits of solitude. Even though we're isolated, doesn't mean that we're using solitude well. So some of us are isolated with family and friends and we got things going on all the time. Find time to be alone in the midst of whatever's going on in your house. Some of us are, isolated alone. So take some opportunities to get those benefits of solitude, of reflection and productivity. It can't be like that all the time, but get those benefits on a regular basis. At this point, I would say daily, especially if you can't get out. And then number 5, I would recommend to be mindful of how you use social media. It was rated high as the thing that people do to stay connected. But when asked how you feel after doing social media, most people felt about neutral. And I take that to mean it'll be interesting to do a greater study on this, that, you know, sometimes you might feel kind of bad. Other times you might feel okay, but in general, the overall experience isn't always positive. So be mindful. Are you looking and reading news? Are the messages that you're seeing from others triggering? I know in the work that I do, I get to hear heavy material and stories all day. And then if I get on my social media feed and I hear about how all my friends in the world are suffering, it's just too much for me in one day. Or you hear about other things that are going on and you want to connect and you're sending messages, but people aren't connecting back to you. And so that could feel isolating, you know, and so figure out why you're using social media, and then you might need to find a real world way to do that. If you really want to connect with someone, instead of reaching out via social media, you might just want to have that phone call or create that video call. Be mindful, because it's going to work for everyone in a different way, but so far we're learning that maybe it's not the thing that's making us feel most positive. Then I have one more recommendation. The next recommendation is about starting a conversation, because while you are caring for yourself, and when you're in a good place and you're able to care for others, you should. So I'm going to show you this video because this is really important. All right, here we go.
Worried about your friend, but don't know how to reach out? You can say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You can chat with them in VR. It's all good. If you think you should check in, yeah, you should. Whatever gets you talking. Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Whatever gets you talking. Learn how you can help at seizetheopera.org.
There are people in our lives that we care about. And so, you know, while we are going through our own things, make sure that there's a couple of people in your life that you are checking in with, that you're starting the conversation with, that you're asking about how they're doing and what's going on with them. And I think, let's see, I think that's all that I have to share. I'm going to give an opportunity to have questions, but before we do that, I just want to share that we have one more presentation in our series. It's called Creating Happiness as a Wellness Plan, and that's going to be given by Jennifer Rudolph, and that will be next Wednesday at 1:30 via Zoom. And in the chat box, Trudy's going to put in there a fact sheet that has the information for next week and getting a hold of our office. Of course, as always, there's the emotional wellness support. We have a staff support hotline. Please use this and pass that information along to others. And of course, this is our office information, so you can get a hold of us. Then on that fact sheet, you can fill out our evaluation survey, because it helps us figure out how well we're doing and if there's more we can do. If you're looking at this right now and you don't want to, you know, get this file, you can take a picture of this with your phone and go right to the survey. It's a QR code, so you can use that to fill out the evaluation. All right, I am putting up my window here. Are there any questions, thoughts about this idea of isolation? Anything anyone wants to share or ask or add before we end?
I appreciate you doing this, Kelly. It's helpful.
I'm grateful. I'm glad that it was helpful. Glad that was helpful. All right, well, with that, I'm gonna stop my share. I'll check the chat box just to see what's in there. Oh, that's the file, so you guys can get a hold of that if you need it. And I appreciate that you all came, took some time to hear. This presentation will be available on our YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of today. So thank you for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.